Hey guys, how are you today? Quick rant before we dive into today's chaos. As some of you might have noticed, YouTube's algorithm has decided I'm not special anymore. Shocking, I know. So now if you don't like, comment, or do a little backflip in the algorithm's honor, this video might just vanish into the void, never to be seen again. Seriously though, even a hi or "this is wild" in the comments helps way more than you think. It tells YouTube, hey, people actually like this channel. Maybe don't hide it from everyone. That can really help push my videos out to a wider audience, not just to my subscribers. So if you enjoy these stories and want to support the channel, that's the best way to do it. Now grab a drink, get comfy, and enjoy the drama. You won't want to miss this one. Getting this promotion had been no small feat. I, 26 female, had spent years proving myself, taking on extra projects, staying late, and making sure my work was flawless. When my manager called me in to break the news, I had barely processed it before my team erupted into cheers. This was a big step forward in my career, and I was proud of myself. Naturally, my friends and colleagues wanted to celebrate. One of my close friends suggested we go out for dinner, and the idea quickly turned into a proper celebration. A restaurant was booked. People confirmed their attendance, and the plan was set. My mom and a few other relatives were excited for me and promised to be there. Even my dad said he'd come, though his response was lukewarm at best. I should have known something was off from the way he reacted when I told him about my promotion. Instead of congratulating me, his response was a simple, "Oh, that's nice." Then he immediately followed it up with, "Well, don't let this get to your head. Promotions don't mean anything unless you can actually handle the responsibility." It wasn't the reaction I wanted. I learned a long time ago that my dad never truly celebrated my achievements. He always found a way to downplay them or shift the conversation to someone else, usually my stepsister Lauren, 20 female. Lauren had only started working a month ago, fresh out of college. She hadn't landed some big dream job or anything. It was an entry-level position, one that required no real experience. Nothing about it was special, but you wouldn't have thought so from the way my dad went on about it. He acted like she had cured cancer or won a Nobel Prize. He had always put her on a pedestal, making excuses for her laziness and hyping up even the smallest things she did. I had no issue with her personally, but it was obvious that my dad treated her like she was made of gold, while I was expected to just handle things on my own. Still, I brushed it off and focused on looking forward to the celebration. I deserved to enjoy this moment. I spent the next few days excitedly preparing, picking out a nice outfit, and making sure everything was set. My friends reassured me that it was going to be a great night. I hoped he acknowledged my success. The day of the celebration finally arrived. I got ready, feeling confident and happy, and made my way to the restaurant. I had invited about 20 people, friends, co-workers, family members, and I was eager to see everyone. When I walked in, the first thing I noticed was the decorations. There were balloons, a banner, and even a cake set up at the main table. I hadn't organized any of that. My heart warmed for a moment, thinking that maybe my dad had actually gone out of his way to do something nice for me. Then, I took a closer look. The banner didn't have my name on it. It had Lauren's. "Congratulations on 1 month at work, Lauren." For a few seconds, I thought I was seeing things. My brain struggled to process what I was looking at. I scanned the room, noticing that some of my coworkers were sitting awkwardly, looking just as confused as I felt. My mom looked like she was about to explode. And my dad, he was grinning proudly, standing next to Lauren like he had just pulled off the greatest surprise in history. I turned to my friend, who had helped organize the event, and she looked absolutely livid. She whispered that she had no idea this was going to happen, that everything had been changed last minute. Lauren, meanwhile, looked smug, but also a little unsure. It was clear that she hadn't expected this much attention, and now that she had it, she didn't quite know what to do with it. My dad finally noticed me standing there, still frozen in place, and he beamed as he said, "You're here. Isn't this great?" I thought it would be nice to celebrate both of you together, but I figured we should highlight Lauren a little more. After all, it's the small wins that count. Small wins. I had spent years working my off to get this promotion, and he had turned my night into a ridiculous celebration for my stepsister, surviving 4 weeks at a job. I could feel my stomach twisting with anger, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to cause a scene. Not yet. Anyway, Lauren giggled and said something about how she didn't expect this, but I could tell she was enjoying it. My dad went on about how it was important to uplift and encourage people at the start of their careers, and that it wasn't always about big promotions and fancy titles. I didn't even know what to say. The sheer audacity of it all was overwhelming. People sat down hesitantly, not sure how to react. My friends and coworkers were visibly uncomfortable. A few of them tried to redirect the conversation back to me, asking about my promotion and congratulating me, but my dad kept steering it back to Lauren. Lauren, tell everyone about your first week. What's the biggest thing you've learned so far? Oh, we should all take turns sharing advice for Lauren as she starts her career. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No one had anything to say. What was there to say? Good job on showing up to work every day? The room filled with awkward silence, and the only sound was the faint clinking of utensils as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Lauren tried to play along, but she clearly sensed the awkwardness too. The forced smiles, the half-hearted applause. It was obvious that no one cared. I sat there watching it all unfold, waiting for my dad to realize just how badly he had miscalculated. But he remained completely oblivious, still pushing the idea that Lauren's small win was just as important as my years of effort. At one point, my best friend leaned over and whispered, "This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Do you want to just leave?" I was tempted. Every second that passed made it harder to sit there and pretend I was okay with what was happening. But a part of me wanted to see how this played out. I wanted to see my dad's face when he finally realized that no one was going along with his nonsense. So, I stayed, and I watched as my dad's big plan slowly crumbled under the weight of its own absurdity. He had expected a heartfelt, joyous reaction from the crowd. Maybe even some enthusiastic speeches about how impressive her accomplishment was. But instead, there was just silence. Uncomfortable, heavy silence. People looked at each other, unsure of what to do, even after he repeated himself multiple times. A few gave Lauren polite nods and a couple of weak claps, but no one was actually excited. I could tell my coworkers were debating whether they should just leave, but they were too polite to cause a scene. Even Lauren, who was initially basking in the attention, started shifting uncomfortably in her seat. I could see the embarrassment on her face. My dad, however, was still determined to make this work. He tried to start up a conversation again, asking Lauren to share what she'd learned in her first month on the job. She blinked and muttered something generic about how it's important to be on time, and teamwork is essential. Another pause. More silence. My best friend leaned over and murmured, "She's just describing the back of an employee handbook." I had to bite my cheek to keep from laughing. My dad, still not getting the hint, turned to my mom and encouraged her to say a few words about Lauren's journey. My mom, who had been visibly fuming this whole time, gave him a long, withering look before speaking. She said it was nice that Lauren was settling into her job, but that tonight was supposed to be about me and my promotion, a promotion that I had worked incredibly hard for. Then, in the most pointed tone possible, she added that real achievements deserved real recognition. The meaning behind her words couldn't have been clearer. I was surprised she kept quiet for so long, but my colleagues were with me, and I know she didn't want to embarrass me. Unlike my father, she was actually a good parent. My dad's face darkened for a second, but he forced out a chuckle, waving a dismissive hand. He said there was no need to compare accomplishments, and that supporting each other was more important than personal recognition. That was when I finally lost my patience. I turned to him and calmly asked why he thought it was okay to overshadow my celebration for something as insignificant as 1 month at an entry-level job. He scoffed, saying that I was overreacting and that I should be mature enough to share the spotlight. I reminded him that this wasn't sharing, this was taking over. My promotion celebration had been planned for me. My friends, my coworkers, and my family were here to celebrate something I had worked years for. And yet, the moment he had a chance, he turned it into some ridiculous event for Lauren, acting as if we had done something equally important. My voice remained steady, but the irritation was clear. I told him that I had spent years proving myself in my field, going above and beyond, earning this moment. Lauren had been showing up to work for a few weeks. That wasn't the same thing, no matter how desperately he wanted it to be. Lauren looked absolutely mortified at this point. She was smart enough to realize how ridiculous the situation was, and unlike my dad, she wasn't determined to force it to work. She kept her head down, fiddling with the edge of the tablecloth. My dad, however, was still clinging to his delusions. He shot back that I was being selfish, that I had more than enough recognition, and that it wasn't a big deal to let Lauren have some attention too. That was when one of my co-workers, who had been silent the whole time, finally spoke up. She was an older woman, someone I respected a lot, and she had no patience for nonsense. She bluntly said that no one had come here to celebrate 1 month at a job, and that it was ridiculous to pretend otherwise. My dad opened his mouth to argue, but she kept going. She said that she had been in the workforce for decades and had never, not once, seen anyone throw a party for simply showing up to work for a month. She asked my dad what exactly he expected people to say. Congratulations for doing the bare minimum. I saw my dad's expression twitch at that, but she wasn't done. She said that in all her years, she had also never seen a father go out of his way to downplay his own child's success like this. That in any normal situation, a father would be proud and would want their child to have their moment instead of desperately trying to redirect the spotlight. Then she leaned back in her chair and added, "But hey, that's just my perspective." My dad looked furious, but he couldn't say anything. The room was now completely against him, and even Lauren wasn't on his side. I turned to her and asked if she had known about this in advance. She quickly shook her head and said that she had no idea he was going to do this. She said she had thought she was just coming to celebrate my promotion and that she never asked for any of this. I believed her. Lauren could be spoiled, but she wasn't stupid. She knew this whole thing was humiliating. She mumbled that she was really sorry and then quietly excused herself to go to the bathroom. At this point, the atmosphere was so uncomfortable that people started whispering about leaving. My friends and co-workers had already sat through enough of this awkward disaster, and no one was in the mood to pretend anymore. My dad, seeing that the party was falling apart, suddenly got defensive. He went from smug to irritated in an instant, claiming that this wasn't his fault. He accused me of ruining the night by being so ungrateful and making a big deal out of nothing. I had to laugh at that. I told him that his attempt to hijack my celebration had already failed miserably. No one was impressed. No one thought this was some touching moment of support. He had embarrassed himself, and then I threw his own words back at him. I said, "It's the small wins that count, right? Well, I'd say tonight's small win is watching everyone realize just how ridiculous you're being." That was the final nail in the coffin. At that point, people started leaving. My friends walked out first, my coworkers following soon after. My best friend gave me a hug before she left, muttering that I deserved way better than this mess. Lauren eventually came back, looking even more embarrassed than before, and just quietly grabbed her things before leaving too. She didn't say a word to my dad. And then finally, it was just me, my mom, and my dad left at the table. He looked around as if shocked that things had turned out this way, as if he genuinely hadn't expected this to blow up in his face. My mom gave him one last unimpressed look, stood up, and said she was leaving too. She turned to me and said, "We should go get drinks somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't ruined by nonsense." I agreed instantly, grabbing my things. As we walked out, my dad called after me, still trying to make me the villain in all this. He shouted that I was the one who made this awkward, that I was selfish, and that I should have just gone along with it. I didn't even bother responding because at the end of the day, it wasn't me who ruined the night. It was him, not the a-hole. OP's dad didn't celebrate both of you. He hijacked OP's night to feed his weird golden child narrative. A promotion OP worked years for is not on the same level as congrats on not getting fired in your first month. The fact that the entire room was visibly uncomfortable, OP's co-workers were confused, and OP's mom had to step in says everything. He embarrassed himself, not OP. And now let's hear community's opinion. Lauren's small win would have been perfectly fine to acknowledge with a "congrats, we're proud of you" at a normal family dinner, not by slapping her name on a banner at your party and pretending that's supportive parenting. Your dad clearly needs to see himself as the benevolent, selfless father who lifts everyone up, even if he has to stomp all over you to do it. You handled it way more calmly than I would have. I actually feel a tiny bit bad for Lauren here. Only a tiny bit. She was smug at first, sure, but she clearly realized how ridiculous and humiliating it became when no one cared and the room went dead. Your dad set her up to be resented by hijacking your moment and pushing her into the spotlight for something that didn't warrant a full event. That's not lifting her up. That's using her as a prop in his ego show. The older coworker who spoke up, MVP of the night, she said what everyone else was thinking. Nobody throws a party for showing up to work for a month, and no decent father would go out of his way to downplay his child's genuine achievement like that. The fact your dad doubled down and called you selfish afterward just proves this was never about family or support. It was about control and his image. You absolutely deserved a celebration that was about you, and I'm glad he ended up standing there alone in his own mess. Update 1. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of texts, and unsurprisingly, they were mostly about last night's disaster. Some were from my friends checking in on me and laughing at how painfully awkward it had been. Others were from my coworkers, still in disbelief that my dad had actually tried to pass off a 1-month job anniversary as an accomplishment. But, of course, the real highlight was my dad's messages. He had apparently spent the entire night stewing in his humiliation, and now instead of reflecting on his own behavior, he had decided that everything was my fault. His first message was short and passive-aggressive. He said I owed Lauren an apology for embarrassing her in front of everyone. I rolled my eyes so hard I almost saw my brain. Lauren wasn't embarrassed because of me. She was embarrassed because he had put her in an impossible position. He had set her up to be the center of attention for something that didn't deserve recognition. And the moment she realized it, she wanted the earth to swallow her whole. That wasn't on me. That was entirely on him. But my dad wasn't done. His next texts were long paragraphs about family values and how I had tried to overshadow Lauren out of pettiness. That one actually made me laugh out loud. I tried to overshadow her. The entire night had been planned as a celebration for my promotion. The restaurant had been booked for me. My friends and coworkers had come to celebrate me. And yet somehow I was the one trying to steal the spotlight. It was so absurd that I didn't even know where to start. I ignored his messages for the time being, knowing that anything I said right now would only turn into an argument. But unsurprisingly, my silence only made him angrier. An hour later, my mom called. She sounded exasperated and said my dad had been ranting all morning about my attitude. She too had ignored his calls and texts. She asked if I wanted to meet up for coffee, and I agreed immediately. I needed to vent. When I got to the coffee shop, my mom was already there, sipping her drink and shaking her head. She said he was still convinced that I was the villain in all this, and now he was saying that I had intentionally ruined the night by making a scene. I let out a humorless laugh. I said that the night was ruined the moment he decided to turn my celebration into some pity party for Lauren. I told her that I had done nothing but react to what was already a train wreck. She sighed and said that she agreed with me completely, but Dad wasn't going to see it that way. He had built up this image of himself as the fair and supportive parent who encouraged all of his kids equally. And now that people had called him out on how ridiculous he had been, he was scrambling to justify himself. I asked her if Lauren had said anything. She shook her head and said Lauren was probably just hiding out, hoping to avoid the fallout. I wasn't surprised. Lauren wasn't a bad person. She could be entitled at times, but she wasn't this delusional. She had been just as embarrassed as everyone else when my dad tried to make her the center of attention, even though she may have enjoyed it at first. Still, I was annoyed. I told my mom that I was tired of this pattern. Every time my dad did something ridiculous, he found a way to blame me instead of just admitting he was wrong. And now he wanted me to apologize for his own mistake. She sighed and said she didn't blame me for being frustrated. Then she took a sip of her coffee and said something that made me pause. She said, "This isn't about you or Lauren." It never was. I frowned, not understanding at first. She leaned forward and said, "My dad had always been like this. He had always needed to control the narrative, to make himself look like the generous, selfless father who uplifted everyone." She said that last night had been his moment. He had seen it as an opportunity to play the hero, to act like the supportive dad who made sure no child was left behind. But the problem was, he had manufactured a situation where that wasn't even necessary. She said he wasn't actually doing this for Lauren, he was doing it for himself. That made me sit back and think she was right. If he had really cared about Lauren's feelings, he wouldn't have thrown her into such an awkward, humiliating situation. He wouldn't have forced her to perform in front of my guests, scrambling to come up with something impressive to say when there was nothing impressive to share. He hadn't done this for her. He had done this for his own ego. And now that it had blown up in his face, he was desperate to rewrite the story. He couldn't handle the fact that people had seen through him, that they had called him out. That was why he was so focused on blaming me. Because if I was the problem, then he wasn't. I let out a deep breath, suddenly feeling exhausted. My mom patted my hand and told me I didn't have to respond to him right away. She said he would eventually stop spiraling. But until then, there was no point in trying to reason with him. I nodded, deciding that she was right. But just as I was about to put my phone away, another message popped up from my dad. It simply said, "I hope you're happy. You ruined your own celebration by acting like a selfish brat." I stared at it for a moment, then turned my phone face down on the table. I looked at my mom and said, "He really doesn't get it, does he?" She sighed, shook her head, and said, "No, and he probably never will." I exhaled sharply and said, "Then that's his problem, not mine." Update 2. I spent the rest of the day ignoring my dad's texts. Every time I saw his name pop up on my phone, I felt my blood pressure spike. But instead of engaging, I focused on myself. I went for a long walk, blasted music in my headphones, and tried to clear my head. I kept replaying my mom's words in my mind, how this was never really about me or Lauren, but about him. She was right. This wasn't the first time he had pulled something like this. Maybe not as blatant, but he had a habit of shifting the spotlight whenever I achieved something, either by downplaying it or making it about someone else. I thought back to when I graduated college. My dad had barely acknowledged it because Lauren was struggling to pass her classes at the time. He had said I should be considerate and not make her feel bad. Then there was the time I got my first job. Instead of congratulating me, he had gone on about how Lauren was still figuring things out, as if my success was a threat to her. Now I had gotten a major promotion, something I had worked so hard for, and he had decided that Lauren completing 1 month at her job was equally deserving of a celebration. And then when it all blew up, I was the one getting blamed. I couldn't do this anymore. I wasn't going to keep letting my dad rewrite reality to make himself feel better. I wasn't going to apologize for expecting to be celebrated in my own right. So, I made a decision. I was done trying to make my dad see my worth. If he wanted to pretend that I was the villain in this story, that was his problem. I wasn't going to waste any more energy proving myself to someone who refused to acknowledge my hard work. That night, I finally responded to his messages. I told him that I wasn't going to apologize because I had nothing to apologize for. I said that he had made a fool of himself, and instead of taking accountability, he was lashing out at me to protect his ego. I said that if he couldn't be happy for me without making it about Lauren, then maybe it would be best if he just stopped pretending to care altogether. Then I muted the chat and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to even more messages from my dad, and they were even more dramatic than before. He called me disrespectful and said I was selfish beyond belief. He said that I clearly didn't care about family and that my ego had gotten too big, mine or his. I just rolled my eyes and deleted the messages. A few hours later, I got a call from Lauren. I hesitated before picking up, expecting her to take my dad's side, but to my surprise, she sounded embarrassed. She said that she didn't blame me for what happened, and that she wished my dad had never done any of that in the first place. She admitted that she had felt humiliated when everyone awkwardly clapped for her, and she was frustrated that our dad was now making this into a bigger mess. I told her that I appreciated her saying that, but I also asked why she hadn't spoken up sooner. She sighed and said that she had tried. She had told our dad that she didn't want to party, but he had insisted. And now that it had backfired, he was doubling down instead of just admitting he was wrong. I asked if she was going to tell him to stop blaming me. She hesitated before saying that she would try, but she wasn't sure if he would listen. Even Lauren knew how to keep up appearances. I thanked her for calling, but deep down, I already knew that it wouldn't make a difference. My dad never admitted he was wrong. Later that evening, my dad decided to take things a step further. Since I wasn't engaging with him, he sent a long-winded message to our entire family group chat. He went on about how disappointed he was in me, how I had disrespected the family, how I had turned my back on my own sister for my own selfish reasons. He painted me as some cold, heartless person who refused to celebrate other people's wins, completely ignoring the fact that this was my celebration in the first place. It was so ridiculous that I just laughed. But the best part, nobody in the family agreed with him. In fact, most people were completely ignoring his message. The only responses were from one of my aunts and a cousin, both of whom just sent vague, "let's all calm down" kind of messages, clearly trying to stay neutral. No one was rushing to defend him. No one was telling me that I was wrong because they all knew. They all saw exactly what had happened, or had at least heard about it. And that must have driven my dad crazy. I wasn't going to waste any more energy on this nonsense. And if my dad wanted to keep playing the victim, then that was his problem. I don't have to keep proving myself to someone who refuses to see me. I had spent so much of my life waiting for my dad to acknowledge my hard work, to celebrate me the way he celebrated Lauren. But he never would. Not because I wasn't worthy, but because he needed to keep pushing this ridiculous narrative where I was the problem and Lauren was the one who needed uplifting. And if that was the story he wanted to tell, then fine. I just wouldn't be a part of it anymore. Update 3. A week later, I had another celebration. This time, the way it should have been from the start. It wasn't anything over the top, just a nice dinner with close friends, some co-workers, and the family members who had actually supported me. My mom came, of course, and so did some of my aunts and cousins. But this time, there was no last-minute hijacking, no awkward forced applause, no one trying to turn the night into something it wasn't. Just me, surrounded by people who were genuinely happy for me. I hadn't invited my dad or Lauren, not out of spite, but because I had finally realized something. I didn't owe them a spot in my happiness. If my dad was going to keep making everything about Lauren, if he was going to keep finding ways to undermine my achievements, then why should I keep giving him the opportunity? Why should I keep letting him into spaces meant to celebrate me when all he ever did was shift the attention elsewhere? I was done. From now on, I was going to handle him the same way I handled distant relatives I barely saw. If we happened to be at the same family gathering, fine. I'd be polite. I'd make small talk if needed. But I wasn't going to invite him into my life anymore. He wasn't going to be at my celebrations. He wasn't going to be in my corner. He had made it very clear where his priorities lay, and I wasn't about to keep begging for a spot on his list. I wasn't even going to have some big dramatic conversation about it. No fights, no ultimatums, no long-winded explanations. Just a slow, steady, quiet removal of him from my life. If he noticed, that was his problem. If he didn't, even better. I felt in control of my own happiness, and as I sat there surrounded by people who actually wanted to be there for me, I knew I had made the right choice.